Hello everyone and welcome to the Meet Melbourne graduate webinar series. Thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar brought to you by the Melbourne School of Design, where we'll be discussing the Master of Urban Planning. My name's Caitlin and I'm from the recruitment and selection team at Melbourne School of Design. I'm joined by Dr. Durley Matteo Babbiano, Senior Lecturer in Urban Planning, as well as two of our current urban planning students, Paul and Cormac. Tonight, Durley will introduce you to urban planning at Melbourne, explain the course content and demonstrate the impact our teaching and research has on urban planning theory and practice. We'll also hear from Paul and Cormac about their experiences as students. We have Jessica helping us out on the live chat function too, so if you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to type it in to the chat and Jess will answer it. We'll also hopefully have some time at the end to ask our participants some questions. So thanks again for joining us, and now I'll hand over to Durley.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hi everyone, I'm Durley. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to Meet Melbourne graduate event. And thank you once again, Caitlin, and your team for the invitation. Although remotely, I am still very happy to be here with all of you. And a quick introduction about myself. I have been with the University of Melbourne for the past 3 years, with the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. I am an academic with the Urban Planning Program. I also serve as the Bachelor of Design Program Coordinator for Urban Planning and Urban Design. However, I do teach and coordinate several master level elective subjects. Some of these are Cities Without Slums, as well as placemaking for the built environment and vocational placement. I'll be talking about the latter later on. As an academic, we do not only teach, but we also conduct research. As you know, Melbourne University is a research university. My research program deals with transport and public space challenges, which I frame as a special justice issue. So my research context is typically set within the Australasian setting. So for instance, I question if street parking, which is fundamentally car immobility, is the best use of public space. Or I also ask, how can we change our gendered approach to transport planning so that we can achieve safer and inclusive transport for everyone? Or better yet, how to shape places that we love, right? Next slide, please. Thanks. For me, the University of Melbourne is not only an outstanding place to do my research, but also to pursue higher end education. In the built environment and architecture, Melbourne School of Design is ranked 17 in the world and #1 in Australia. So you're in excellent hands if you join our faculty. Our faculty houses cutting edge facilities such as Next Lab and Fab Lab, and all of these is set within a 6-star Green Star rated building. It is a globally recognized institution that offers a distinct student experience through commitment to research-led teaching. So our internationally renowned researchers bring their research expertise into their teaching. Our close connection with City of Melbourne neatly allows the city to be our living laboratory to experiment concepts, ideas, and strategies to achieve livable places. But foremost, we are committed to fostering reconciliation, acknowledging that traditional owners of the land on which our campuses stand. Next slide, please. Some of the research, on the slide, you will see some of the research that we do at the Melbourne School of Design. So for instance, my research on transport leadership is mainly to empower women in transport for positive change, not just in Australia, but also in other ASEAN countries. So we also have research that focuses on Indigenous placemaking, which explores the processing of Indigenous placemaking in central Melbourne. We also have research on participatory and integrated approaches to bushfire prevention, healthcare design for improved patient outcomes, as well as waste management and the adoption of artificial intelligence technology to develop more effective cost-effective forecasting methods for building projects. So as you can imagine, our research, we work in interdisciplinary team. we engage deeply with our communities, and we are obviously driven by our sense of social justice and responsibility, showing our strong commitment to make our loved local and global cities and communities better. Next slide, please. Several of our leading edge research hubs, labs, and institutes are co-located within our faculty, the Melbourne School of Design. So for instance, one of the lab, which is led by Professor Michele Acuto, is the Connected Cities Lab. So currently, one of their current work is actually on how cities would look like in a post-COVID world. So what was interesting about this lab is that, I would recommend you to listen to a podcast that they have developed. So they had conversations with two eminent researchers from Canada, Roger Kale and Jody McVernon from Melbourne. And that was in December when they were talking about the role of urban environments on global pandemic. It was very strange for me listening to the podcast a few weeks ago, because that conversation, which happened in December, proved to be strangely prophetic, because now we are in this situation. We also have the Informal Urbanism Hub, which is led by Professor Kim Dovey, and it's concerned with self-organized and bottom-up urbanism. So there are very diverse research pathways that you could be involved in as a master level student. Next slide, please. The Master of Urban Planning, Urban and Regional Planning program at ABP is accredited by the Planning Institute of Australia. So PIA is the peak body for the education and practice of urban planning in the country, and we do the accreditation process every 5 years. So it means that our accreditation is a recognition of the quality program that we deliver. The employers all over Australia recognize that. And of course, beyond theory and research offering by ABP, we also add value, a lot of value to our education, to our teaching, by closely engaging with industry through our tutors and lecturers who are currently working as urban planners. And I do invite a lot of guest lecturers from industry, as well as work with local councils in identifying problems within their locality as a case study for my subjects. We also have a strong cohort of internationally recognized academics and researchers who support research-led teaching. But most importantly, we understand that critical thinking, design thinking, and innovative thinking are skills that are vital towards fostering an interdisciplinary learning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what will we learn in our program? So we cover key knowledge areas in urban planning. It could be as diverse as the frameworks and operations of different planning systems and debates. At the same time, it could also be different perspectives on urban problems, policies, planning, and practices. And we usually use several lenses drawn from multidisciplinary disciplines, drawing from sociology, psychology, humanities, arts, even engineering and health, to understand issues in housing, energy, health, transport, economy, disaster recovery, you name it. But most importantly, aside from the content knowledge, we also learn skill set that would enable us to work with teams, negotiate and lead teams, communicate in different media, among others. We also, most importantly, apply these knowledge as well as skills in actual practice to address real world problems. Next slide, please. So what does our course look like? So this is a course structure. So it's usually taken as a 2-year full-time or a 4-year part-time program. It would require you to complete 8 core subjects and then cover 4 specialization subjects. You can see on the screen several specialization pathways. So international planning and development, transport planning and politics, etc. Then you have the opportunity to take 2 multidisciplinary electives, as well as a Master of Urban Planning capstone subject. So in terms of the multidisciplinary electives that is on offer, we offer a diverse set of subjects that are being offered in other programs. So this could be in economics, engineering, public health, development studies, social work, and law. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the screen, there are study plans that could potentially be your study plan. So they're on the right side of the screen, and it could be completed in 2 years. But you may also take advantage of electives that are offered as a winter or summer intensives. This means that instead of offering them as a subject across 12 weeks, you can take them in, let's say, 2 weeks or a week. And these are subjects that are usually delivered within a shorter time period. And usually these are favored by students who have other commitments. So for example, they have full-time work and they can only take leave for a week or two in July, then they can take these subjects. Another flexible subject offering within our faculty is the vocational placement. So it is quite popular with students because it is a work-integrated learning subject. So it allows students to gain firsthand understanding of urban planning in practice. So mainly you will be spending about 80 to 120 hours with a work placement. And the onus is for the student to find the work placement and then enroll in the subject. And then 50 hours to complete a subject, you have to allocate about 170 hours in total. So 120 is working with the placement, and then the 50 hours is working for finalizing the assessment, which is usually a critical reflection of your workplace experience. Yeah, next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, there are two capstone options, sorry about that. The first is a minor thesis, and which is typically a pathway to a PhD. And then another option is a capstone studio, which is usually the professional pathway. So I will be explaining the first option, which is the minor thesis. So in the first semester, the student will develop a research question, come up with a review of the literature, and then come up with a research plan. Then in the second semester, this is usually the operationalization of that research plan, wherein you then synthesize the results that you have gathered and then present it, and present the results usually to an audience. And the idea for this is to develop one's expertise in a particular urban planning issue and develop critical thinking as well as research skills. So it's usually a lot of independent learning that's happening, but you will be guided by and supervised by a leading academic within the faculty. So these are some examples of the research expertise or research areas of academics within the urban planning discipline on your right side. So next slide, please. So an MUP capstone studio, this is an alternative to the other one. This is more of a practice-oriented focus. So as I mentioned earlier, a professional pathway. So students work in teams on a complex real-world problem or brief. And usually what we do is we would have tie-up with local councils or state government to kind of identify a real-world problem or real-world challenge. And then we use it as a case study that would be addressed within the studio. So this semester we have offered Studio H, which is taught by Dr. Jeff Brown. He has previously worked in Vic Health and a senior policy analyst with Victorian Environment Department and an environment commissioner. Right, but he's completed his PhD in urban planning and health, and now he has offered this studio. Previously, we had I ran a studio on placemaking, and I think this coming semester we have a nighttime studio. So this is understanding what's happening during the evening. So the logistics and understanding the nighttime economy. Next slide, please. So job outlook. So urban planning is a growth area, particularly in this time wherein we recognize the role of city planning as a vital strategy in delivering healthy, inclusive, and resilient cities and communities. Many of our graduates usually join the public sector and work in government departments as both local and state or even federal. Some also work in the regions. An increasing range of employment opportunities exist in private sector as well as in civil society, both in Australia as well as internationally. So some of our graduates actually go into work with international non-government organizations. So as earlier mentioned, another pathway, which we have discussed earlier, is that taking minor thesis is a pathway towards a PhD. Yeah, thank you. And now I turn over to Cormac, then to Paul. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, so first of all, we're going to hear from Cormac, who's one of our current students. Thanks, Cormac.
Yeah, hi guys. I'll give you a little introduction to how I got into the course and what I'm doing. I got interested in urban planning from my undergraduate degree, which I did a Bachelor of Arts in Geology. The honours thesis looked at Federation Square and the Apple Store that was going into there last year. I got interested in kind of stakeholder negotiations and how that all kind of plays out in the world, and it just seemed to be a pretty natural thing to go on to. After all that, where I could look at something similar, which I'm doing now, I'm kind of looking at the minor thesis now. So I'll just go to the next slide if that's possible. So I'm a year and a half through the course. The course is 2 years. In the first year, you do compulsory subjects where they kind of set you up for the second year. In this second year, which I'm in now, you either do what Durley was mentioning before, you do a thesis or you do a capstone subject. At the moment, I'm kind of halfway through my thesis, where I'm looking at affordable housing negotiations that are going on in Melbourne. That's basically a new kind of form of housing that the councils and also state government are negotiating with private developers with, trying to get them to include rent-controlled housing units within bigger private developments to try and kind of level out the rental housing market, I guess, and allow people who don't earn as much money as others to live closer to the inner city. But there's kind of like a very loose policy framework around that at the moment, so a lot of it actually gets decided at the table in between developers and council, which I find interesting. So I'm setting it up at the moment. I'm going to try and interview a bunch of different developers and people who are writing the policies around it at the moment, and also the council officers who are negotiating with the developers, and seeing how that all kind of happens in the real world, which is pretty exciting. And I'm also doing one of the good things about the course, I find anyway, because I'm particularly interested in research, is that you're allowed to do independent study. So another thing I'm doing at the moment this semester is I'm writing a independent paper on a more of a historical book with one of the academics in the faculty, David Nichols, who is more into the history of planning, about how places get named within Victoria. And yeah, I think I'll go on to the next slide now. And yeah, apart from that, I also I'm working at the moment at a statutory planning firm. There's two sides, there's a few different sides of planning, but the two kind of big divisions in professional planning are statutory and strategic. Strategic is more the policy side, and statutory is the kind of more legalistic, rules-based side. In October, I approached a few different firms with kind of my work experience thus far, and the research I'd been doing and what I was interested in, and I managed to get an internship at SJB. SJB are a statutory planning firm, and what they basically do is that they help government and they help private developers kind of, I guess, basically just get things built within the planning rules and within the regulations, and then they also help justify them through the policy. So these are like a few, just the pictures here, like a few different projects that I've worked on personally. I've worked on the one in the top left here was like a medical centre and a growth area outside of Melbourne, up around Mernda, where we were just trying to kind of get a medical centre built and find out how we could justify it, and also how like, the actual kind of regulations that it would have to follow to get in. The one under that was the Fitzroy bike path, which was something that I also worked on, and kind of how we could update that bike path to make it safer for cyclists and also safer for road users. The other ones down the bottom are more kind of generic, just private developments that I've been working on in Heidelberg and in Richmond. And what I'll kind of do on those projects at an intern level, I've been kept on this year and I'm still working there after my internship, is that I'll go out and I'll do site inspections, which are pretty fun. It's a pretty fun way to work. Really, you get to go out on site and kind of look at the site yourself, take the notes, and then you come back and you'll write up a report. Then you'll kind of have a look at the planning controls and you'll look at the policies and you'll see what's possible there before I send it up to someone kind of higher up the chain who'll then start talking to council and to the developers. And yeah, I guess it's kind of work that goes on all the time, I guess. It's pretty, so it could be like a lot of it's pretty crucial. So we've been doing work, we've still been doing work at the moment while everything's happening with this Glen Waverley new library, where we're looking at the possibilities for updating the library. And other thing, like another thing I did like last week was doing something like writing a letter to council trying to get a Coles, a few different Coles, their delivery hours extended and their loading hours extended so that they can kind of increase their capacity at the time. So those are just kind of examples of what I'm doing professionally as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it from me. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the box, I think. So I'll hand it over to Paul.
Thanks, Cormac. That was great. Yeah, and as he said, now we'll hear from Paul. Thanks, Paul.
Hi, can you hear me? Wonderful, great. Hi, everyone. I am Paul, and I will start off by saying that my background was also not from a planning background. So at an undergraduate level, I actually studied ancient world studies, and I finished my course and worked as a trip leader or a tour guide in Europe. And that's what really got me into planning. So I was visiting a lot of different cities, and I saw a lot of things that I really liked. For example, different public transport systems, heritage protection, and I also really enjoyed this idea of play, or, you know, not necessarily just having a city where you can live and work, but also a place where you can enjoy things. And that's what really kind of sparked an interest in urban planning. And that's why I've applied for the course, and I've really loved it so far. So I'm happy to go on to the next slide and maybe just highlight a few of the key things that I've learned in this course, and that I've also been able to do, which I don't know if I necessarily knew 100% what planning was going to be when I applied, but I've just really fallen in love with it. So you can see some projects that I've worked on this slide. A lot of the projects that we do involve analysing existing policy, which is something that planners have to do all the time in the real world when they're working. So I've loved being able to look at policy at different levels, from the international to the local, and even policy documents that are prepared by NGOs, and analysing how they all fit in. And then we can use that information to develop our own policies that coordinate with existing frameworks. So for example, I created an economic development strategy for Hoppers Crossing, which is a neighbourhood or suburb of Melbourne. And I was able to use the local government area's own policies and adapt them and add to them to create an economic development plan that focused on play. So I have things like, an activities pass and trying to highlight the fact that there could be tourism to help us crossing. Similarly, I used local policy in Bendigo to determine which parts of the city could be expanded for a new residential suburb. And that was quite an interesting project as well, because I was able to use GIS, which is basically like, if anyone doesn't know what it is, it's like spatialized data and mapping, which I really quite enjoyed. It was quite a difficult project, but I quite enjoyed. So a little bit more technical from an arts background than what I was used to, but really loved it. And I've also been able to analyze the successes and failures of innovative interventions in this course. So I've looked at everything from a metro project in Greece and cable cars in Latin American slums. So, I mean, from a transport perspective, I'm really quite interested in how we can improve public transport. And so to be able to analyze what's gone wrong in public transport and what could be done better, that's something that I'm really interested in. And we can go on to the next slide as well, if you like. I've also really enjoyed talking about participatory planning techniques, and that involves getting people to participate in what we're planning. So for example, people, so normal citizens, shall I say, we want to hear what they think when we're planning a city, and it's not always immediately obvious how to target groups that don't traditionally have a say or have a role in planning, but there's a subject, a core subject called participatory planning, in which we actually get tasked with convincing people to participate. So I really love that. I've gotten to use a lot of Adobe Illustrator and InDesign and Photoshop, which I'd never known how to use before. A lot of SketchUp, which is like a 3D sketching program. So there's a lot of skills and practical knowledge that we're getting from this course, as well as the theoretical. And something else that I've really enjoyed is being able to incorporate my own travels into what I've later studied. So when you conduct field trips and site analyses, that's really cool, especially if you can go internationally to do so. So these photos on the right are from La Paz in Bolivia. And so this course really helps me to link my 4 kind of main themes, which are public transport, social justice, heritage, I guess that's from when I studied ancient world studies, and this concept of play, and then propose realistic improvements to the outside world. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and that's why I love the course.
Thanks so much, Paul, and Cormac as well. It's really interesting to hear how each of your individual passions you can really bring to the degree and kind of help shape what you study and what you do afterwards. So next we've got a few more slides just around the practicalities of applying that Durley's going to take us through, and then we will hopefully have some time for some more questions after that. So thanks, Durley.
Okay, I'm back. Could you hear me? Yeah, okay. So yeah, so to continue, so we have extended our application deadline to the 28th of June. Sorry about that. So just emails. Okay, I'll just put that. And just to explain how to apply, so there are entry requirements. So you would need to put in a personal statement, which is about 500 words, and you would just state, it's just linking your background, your professional or your academic background, to why you intend to pursue a Master of Urban Planning at the University of Melbourne, stating how it could add value to what you already know now, and how it can then help you achieve, your kind of your future plans and achievements, right? So that's basically what your personal statement is, and it has to be quite convincing. And at the same time, there's a minimum requirement of 65% average in any 3-year undergrad. So it means that in whatever program you can come from any program as kind of a foundational undergraduate degree, and then you can enter planning And that's why it's important to note that when urban planning is really multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, because we do draw from our foundational programs. So for instance, I'm an architect, so I finished a bachelor in architecture. Then I moved into urban planning and then decided that within that urban planning, program, which was quite generalist, I thought that I'd specialize in transportation planning. And that's why my PhD is in civil engineering, major in transportation planning, right? So application deadlines, as I've mentioned earlier, it's been moved to the 28th of June. And for domestic students, you can access the Graduate Access Melbourne. So if you can demonstrate that there are circumstances that have affected your studies, so this would be taken into account. Next slide, please. Yeah. So fees. So CSPs are also available in the course and are based on merit, so academic merit. And you can definitely defer full fee places onto a fee help debt for repayment when you are working. Okay, next slide, please. And I think this is the last slide. So documents that are required for you to complete your application. So official academic transcripts. And this is usually including studies that you have completed as well as incomplete ones. And you need to have a proof of completion for an undergraduate degree. If incomplete, you can still apply, but then it would mainly be a conditional offer that would be provided to you. And of course, as I've mentioned earlier, the personal statement, which is a 500-word statement that would outline your prior study, your work experience, and the motivations to undertake the urban planning program, and your understanding of what this course will offer to you. So a lot of these would usually, as mentioned earlier, if your previous experience, how can you use that to add value into the program when you interact with your other peers? And at the same time, what can you take from the program, your understanding of what you will learn from the program, and reflecting on how it allows you to achieve your future plan or to lead you towards your future plan. Okay, so I think that's about it, Caitlin. So we would ask if you have some questions, if you can write them down in the chat box. Thank you.
Thanks, Dirlie. So yeah, we do have a little bit of time still for some questions. And we've had a couple of people asking about what background to come from and if there's any advantage to say come into urban planning from an architecture background. Paul and Cormac are great examples of people that have come from an arts background, so not directly related to design or planning. But Dirlie, did you have any kind of insights into the things that people from other backgrounds bring to the degree?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Caitlin, for the question. And I think the strength of the urban planning program lies on the different contributions of the different areas or different disciplinary background of the students that come into the program. And I mean, I come from an architecture background. It's really very design based, right? And I moved into transportation planning as my research area, and now I do teach into urban design and as well as placemaking. So I draw from my design background, in terms of how I look at the perspective that I look at different challenges, in cities. For instance, I look at transport not just as a mobility precinct, but it's actually a place for other activities, other non-movement activities beyond, mobility. So what does that mean? So as I've mentioned earlier, I'm looking at street parking as a car immobility problem, right? Is it the best use of public space when we are looking at it is as an immobility challenge, right? So, a lot of these are really very useful, and I use a lot of theories and concepts in sociology, in behavioral economics, for instance, to understand the behavior, to understand how I can achieve transformative change if I want people to, think differently as they do now, right? So I think the beauty of the program is really, the strength of the program is really brought in by the different disciplines that, the different disciplinary backgrounds of the students that come into the program.
And Paul, you mentioned when you were talking about how you were using InDesign and new programs and sort of learning as you go, things that you wouldn't have learned in your arts degree. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the support and the ways that you get to learn these new programs?
Yeah, totally. So a lot of this comes through a kind of famous subject called land use and urban design, in which we have about 12 weeks to present several posters that include like 3D sketches of an area. So all the buildings have to be done in 3D. And then we're proposing changes to the public and the private realm. And I went from absolutely zero Adobe skills in week 1 of this subject to, I mean, I'm not brilliant, but I have now been able to not only complete that subject with an all right mark, but also, use those skills in other subjects. And now I know how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and SketchUp. So it is kind of intensive, but the course kind of forces you to pick up skills from each other, from other students, and also just from the assessments that we have. And I mean, that's like a really obvious skill in terms of like, here is something specific that I can say, but there's also a lot of other kind of like policy analysis skills or participatory planning technique skills, or just even conceptual thinking skills that are maybe, in a way, I would say maybe softer, but still just as relevant. So yeah, that's definitely the case, that not a lot of that came from arts. So a lot of that design stuff was brand new for me.
Right, yeah. And we did have a couple of people asking as well about portfolios and if you need a portfolio to apply for urban planning, that sort of thing. So I think no is the answer, and that really demonstrates, Paul, your answer and Jurley's explanation really demonstrates that, it's such a breadth of knowledge and skills that you bring to urban planning, and all the skills that you need to succeed in the Masters you're going to get when you're here. So you don't need to come in as a fabulous designer, but you'll leave having all the skills you need to have a really successful career. And speaking of careers, my next question, sorry, go Paul.
Oh no, I was just going to add a very brief thing to that and say, yeah, I've learned from people who came from social work, from engineering, from environments. So it's truly a mixed bag, but I really love that. So that's all, sorry.
No, that's great. I was just going to segue into a careers question for both of you. So maybe Cormac, if we start with you, we know you were already working as you study. What are your plans or goals after you finish the degree in 6 months' time?
Yeah, so I'm working at the firm at the moment, which I was talking about. I've also had work experience at another town planning firm. So I've got work experience at 2 firms. The other one's called Hanson Partnership in the city. So I guess I'm planning on training up while I'm there. That's within statutory planning, which is, I guess, a bit different than the strategic or the design side of planning, but it's kind of important that all those sides of planning talk to each other. So I guess I was keen to get experience in the statutory side, and I guess I haven't quite decided whether I'll stick with statutory planning or whether I'll try and go into something like government or a firm that specialises in a more strategic outlook. But I think it's what I thought was important to do was to get the strategic base, which is the kind of regulatory legal base of planning, which then kind of helps you if you go into any of the other sides. So I'm just still being trained all the time. It's pretty fun what I do. I get to do something different every day. I guess I'm looking at one of the things I like about working, I guess, in the private part of planning is that you get to work all over the city. I think lots of people work for local councils where you can be limited to one kind of area. So that's what I like about private you get to work all over the city. And yeah, I get to work on different projects every day, dealing with different people. It's quite good if you like talking to people. I talk to a lot of people every day. I talk to people in council, I talk to developers, I talk to also people around the developments. I have to talk to objectors, I have to talk to people who support developments. So I guess I'm still trying to figure out what I'm trying to do, but there seems to be lots of options, and it's something that is definitely growing as a field and as a profession.
And what about you, Paul?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying that I'm a little bit indecisive just naturally as a person. But there's a lot of talk by people of, you know, I want to get into strategic, or I want to get into statutory, or even specific subsets of planning. I'm not really putting a specific limit on myself. I don't think I have a preference for one over the other, but I do have certain things that I'm really passionate about. So I'm really passionate about transport, social justice, this idea of play, which I think I've just mentioned a few times, but like I'm trying to find anything that maybe might relate a couple of those, and that could be both in strategic or statutory. So yeah, I haven't really limited myself. I have started applying for jobs, but only recently. So yeah, I think that as time progresses, I'll be able to maybe branch out and potentially even move into state or overseas, because I'd love to eventually work elsewhere as well, just to get a bit of a change of scenery. So yeah.
Great. And I did get a comment from Jess manning the chat room that people are loving your travel stories and photos, Paul. So hopefully you can get overseas again very soon. Now we've got literally 3 minutes left. So Jerly, perhaps one quick question for you. We have had a couple of people asking about the main differences between urban design and urban planning. And I know you teach into both of our degrees. So if you could, in 2 minutes, give us a really quick explanation, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a very contentious, thank you, Caitlin. That's a very contentious question, because depending on who you're asking, you would get a different response. So since I come from an urban planning program, so I belong to an urban planning program, so I'll probably respond to that question from that perspective. So urban design is one of the knowledge areas of urban planning. So urban planning is, as mentioned earlier, accredited by Planning Institute of Australia. And as part of that accreditation, they have core knowledge skills that you need to have when you finish the program. So they accredit every program in terms of the skill set, in terms of the content knowledge, as well as the applications of knowledge and skills when you finish the program, right? So they've identified as part of the specialist knowledge 5 of these, which include urban design. So we have transportation planning, political studies, I forgot exactly, environmental planning, what else? Social work, social planning, etc. So one of them would be urban design. So within that context, urban design is a subset of urban planning, and it deals with spaces between buildings. So it can focus on different dimensions when we're talking about, you know, in between buildings. So it would be the public spaces, whether they are, you know, privately owned or publicly owned, as long as they are being used by the public, then they are considered as public spaces. They are in between buildings, and they can have different dimensions: the visual, the spatial, the social dimension. So it's that focus on a particular area within a city or a community, which are in between buildings. That's what urban design is. And in terms of urban planning, that's the larger scheme and could be at different scales as well. So that's basically how you differentiate urban planning from urban design. Hopefully I answered your question.
You answered that perfectly, and you left us probably less than 1 minute to do a wrap up. So that's perfect. Thank you so much. I just wanted to end by saying thank you to Durley, thank you to Paul, and thank you to Cormac for your time and for putting so much thought into your presentations. We really appreciate it. On the screen, you should see our MSD-info email address. So for any of our attendees who have additional questions or wanted to ask something as a follow-up to anything we've discussed, please feel free to contact our team and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you again for joining us. All the best, and we hope to see you at MSD very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.